was really to explore technology to build your own structures and to develop formats and infrastructures that would work outside the traditional art world. It was this very strong idea of creating self-organized structures, infrastructures to make us independent from the traditional art world.
Hello and welcome to the Culture and Technology podcast. I'm your host, Severin Matusek. When I started to surf the web back in the days of the mid-1990s, I used the internet for playing games and talking to strangers in chat rooms. I had no idea that the internet could also be used to create art. Did you? Cornelia Sollfrank certainly did. An artist and researcher, Cornelia is widely considered as a pioneer of internet art. She lived in New York City in the mid-90s and, together with a small group of hackers and artists, explored the possibilities of how this emerging technology can be used to create art and infrastructures that were different from the traditional art world.
It was a pioneer work, and a lot of people built up things and structures and developed ideas that are still very relevant today.
That makes me curious. What can we learn from the pioneers of internet art about the state of technology today? Dr. Cornelia Sollfrank, what a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Severin. My pleasure.
I believe when we talk about the future of culture and technology, it's about how technology is changing culture in our lives. And obviously the last year changed our lives profoundly. So have you been baking sourdough bread? Did you take up gardening? How was last year for you?
Good question, because in fact, I normally live in Berlin. As you know, we are almost neighbors in Berlin. But I try to get out of the city for obvious reasons, because being in the city, urban life is about going out, meeting people, going to cultural events. All of that was not possible last year. So why would you be in the city? So we are lucky because we have this little house in the countryside. And I came here in mid-March last year. Thought, okay, for some months I'll manage to live in the countryside. It's been now 14 months that I'm here. Most of the time I was just 2 quick trips in Berlin. That's it.
Congrats.
And it was crazy to see how much traveling I did for work. Not traveling at all, and seeing, in 1 month you go to 4, 5, 6, 7 different locations for work. I didn't do any of that. This has its advantages as well. I realized that I'm much more focused on things. There's much more continuity in working if you're not constantly interrupted by traveling. On the other hand, there's a very huge garden here, which always tries to invite me to weed and plant things, but I'm afraid that's not me. I can't get excited about gardening at all.
That's interesting, because I feel like, there's this concept of digital gardening that has become very modern as well in the last year, I think, where people talk about the digital and technologies as something we have to maintain, care about, and grow, and put love and tenderness in there, which I think is also a topic of your work. But obviously, in the real world, gardening is not really an interest of yours.
You have to make up your mind what you want to take care of, And I decided at one point consciously, do I want to engage with the garden or not? And then I said, no, I'd rather take care of my own server. So I started to build my own server, and there's a lot of work related to that. It's very complex. And I'm much more happy with that at the moment.
What I'd like to talk about today is actually the history and the present about what it means to work on the internet, and also what it means to be an artist on the internet, which is obviously something you have been part of since the very early days. So if we go back to the mid-90s, I think in the mid-90s, you were in New York And that's when net art, this very fresh new thing, just started becoming interesting. How did you get involved with it back then, and what was the scene like?
Yeah, I mean, it was no coincidence that I was in New York. I applied for a fellowship to actually investigate internet art in New York, which caused some discussion, with the funders, because we thought it's internet art. Why do you have to go somewhere to explore it? It's online. That, yeah, because there is the scene where things happen, and I need to be on site and talk to the people, and I want to do interviews and all of that. And it was, in fact, a lot focusing on New York at the time. It was several projects which are still very relevant today. One of the biggest actually is Rhizome, the art base, which also was started by Mark Tribe. Back then, there was a gallery that was dedicated to make exhibitions around this new digital computer-based formats, which was very experimental. They didn't make any money out of that. They were selling traditional art and put their money into the digital art. And there was Moo theaters, and all kind of projects. And it's really interesting to think back to that, because it was a pioneer work, and a lot of people built up things and structures and developed ideas that are still very relevant today. And because it was not a very big scene, it was maybe a dozen people, or if it's a lot, it was 24 people who were engaged in that. And it was amazing. And I'm still in touch with many of them, and we still have this feeling of being connected through this spirit of the early days when we had such great ideas about the emancipatory potential of technology.
And why was it so small, the scene? Were there people who were critical about net art as such? Were there artists who said technology is not for me, it's about painting, or it's about non-technological uses? Why was the scene so small in the mid-90s?
I think it was really because it was emerging. It was in mid-90s, the World Wide Web only was basically made accessible to a larger audience. And in the beginning, there were 6 websites. I don't know how many websites exist today, but it was this running gag. You have 6 websites. You all know them by heart, basically. And I think it was just not for everyone of interest. And also for me, it's very different today, digital art, especially with this whole hype around NFTs and, digital graphics and virtual reality. This was not what people were interested back then. It was really to explore technology, to build your own structures and to develop formats and infrastructures that would work outside the traditional art world. It was this very strong idea of creating self-organized structures, infrastructures to make us independent from the traditional art world.
So technology was a means to an end to break out of an existing system with its rules and boundaries. But then you also mentioned that technology is never neutral. And I think also a lot about your own work that, for example, with Net Art Generator and Female Extension, was to question some of the cultures, ideologies that are implanted in certain uses of technology. How aware were you and the artists back then of technology as a tool that's never neutral?
I would say not much at all. That was really not the discussion. There was this excitement, about machines and code, and we associated with that hacker culture. And hacker culture, MIT, all the labs where these guys were developing great stuff, protocols and whatever. So it was more that we wanted to participate in this hacker culture and become part of that. That was much more prominent or predominant, also because what we know today, the predominant of the big corporations that kind of have technological development under control, that was not visible at all. And of course, there was Windows. We didn't like Windows. It was Bill Gates. It was proprietary. We didn't like it. So, people more moved to Apple and Macintosh because that was still cool back then. I think this idea to be critical of technology was really not in the air in the beginning, because technological development had come out of a critical underground culture, basically most of it. So that was what we were interested in.
You were also part of a sort of community back then that was called The Thing, right? Mm-hmm. The Thing New York, which was, I think, an arts community, but also an internet service provider and a bulletin board. And I would say it was one of the first, it was a community you were part of. So can you tell us a little bit about what it meant to be part of that community back then, how you self-organized, how your relationships formed, and what it became today?
Yeah, The Thing is really an interesting project because it was started in 1991, which is exactly 30 years ago, if you imagine. And it started as a bulletin board system. So it was no fancy, graphic user design or anything. The idea was simple. It was that artists want to initiate their own speaking and writing about art. There was like a gesture of empowerment to not only make the art and let others talk about it, but to create a discursive space ourselves where we would discuss art. The interesting thing was it was founded in New York by a German artist. And because there was already this transatlantic connection, of Wolfgang Stehle, who had a big network also in Germany, the thing was that it was, on the one hand, it was a local thing in New York. They also had an office space and all kind of facilities. But there was, from the beginning on, a very strong connection to different locations in Europe. I think the first one was in Cologne. There was one in Hamburg. And if you look up, there is a long entry on Wikipedia about The Thing. And if you look it up, you can see that over the time, 13 Thing platforms have been created in different countries and cities outside of New York. And this understood itself as operating in the spirit of The Thing New York, but creating an independent platform. What was interesting about that the founder, Wolfgang Stehle, he was very open and generous. He said to everyone, you can use the concept, but you can do an implementation as you like or as it makes sense in your own environment. And that was very inspiring for people, because you could do something that was very specific to your location. At the same time, you always were part of the big network.
Then to your own personal work, the Net Art generator that followed out of that, how inspired? I mean, before you talk about it, and I believe you have talked about it for very many times, because I think this is the one main work that has become so influential and also been part of your biography. So how did one lead to another? You coming to New York, connecting with the few dozen internet artists, being part of the Thing New York, and then creating Female Extension and Net Art Generator. How did that happen?
It was interesting because my time in New York, I used to explore all these projects and try to get an understanding what is it about. I did not have my own approach or my own work back then. So it was really an exploration, was research. When I came back from New York, the first thing that I heard was that the Kunsthalle Hamburg was going to do the first museum competition for internet art. And I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what no one needs and no one wants. And it is a complete misunderstanding, because internet art was really about, creating independent spaces and not being judged by the traditional art world.
Which I find is so interesting, because today it would be different, right? If the Kunsthalle Hamburg would make such a competition today, you wouldn't be that critical about it, because it has become such a norm that large institutions all are part of, this bigger thing.
Yes, it changed. It definitely changed. And I have been collaborating with big institutions also, but I prefer small institutions, I have to say, to collaborate. It has to do with the basic paradigms of digital art. And I think they still do not go very well with the needs of the art world. I mean, it has been a constant struggle, how to make a digital artwork unique or an original that can be sold and all of that. So coming back to this competition in Hamburg, it made me very angry, and I thought they don't get the thing, and I don't want to be judged by them, and they should not be like the best net artist. It's totally against the spirit of community, of collaboration, of building independent spaces. So I made a plan to certainly disrupt the competition. If not totally destroy it. I mean, I was not sure how far I would get with my plan, but I thought one interesting hacker strategy is to flood, for example, a server with so many requests that it breaks down. So it's kind of flooding. So I thought, okay, I don't criticize what's going on. I just flood the competition with so many net artists that they will not be able to handle it. So I created 300 fictitious net artists and flooded the competition. It was all automated, so it didn't break down, but then I had to create 300 fictitious net art projects. And for that, I used an old cultural technique from the 20th century, which is collage. So I made a code collage. I made a collage of randomly pasted HTML code to create new websites. And I just sent all these websites to the museum, for the jury to be judged. And still everything worked and nothing happened until the final press release was sent out by the museum, and they had three. And I have to say, the 300 artists I created were all female, and the 3 prizes that were given away were given to male artists. And in the meantime, the museum already had published a press release saying it's a huge success, and more than 2/3 of the artists that submitted works were female. And they had forgotten about that in the process. In the end, it was 3 male artists. And so I didn't actually manage to technically, crash or break the competition. So the only chance left, I had to go to the press conference and hand out my press release where I said, okay, guys, this is what I did. I submitted the 300 fake artists and websites, and I think that is an adequate response to call for net art, because this is what the internet is about: to create fake identities, to multiply, to have no original artists and artworks, and so on and so forth. The museum did not find that funny at all. They don't find it funny today. I mean, there in the years after, there have been art historians researching net art. They got in touch with the museum and they tried to get information on it. There's nothing in the files. It's been deleted from the history of the museum. But I'm telling this story also because it leads to the net art generator, because copying and pasting randomly HTML code created very interesting websites. And after the competition, I decided that I wanted to follow this path because I thought it's quite interesting. It, like the collage was the first step in modernism, to question, to go away from the idea of the white canvas and the original artist that does an original creation. Collage was already based on existing material that was recombined. And this is what I exactly did with the Net Art generator. I developed a script that randomly combined existing material on the internet to make it into new works. And for me, that has a lot to do with this attempt, or with these ideas of creating independent spaces and empowering artists, because for me that was also a criticism of the idea of the genius artist creator and the idea of the original work. So that is the context.
I thought it was so interesting as well, because what you created back then in 1997 still is so relevant today when these collage websites that are essentially fake. Fake news is a big challenge on that today, right? With all these websites basically transmitting knowledge that's essentially not true, as well as fake profiles where lots of social media profiles out there are actually fake. They are bots created by other people who probably with the same intention as you had. They want to manipulate, they want to steer to certain, or they want to criticize, or they want to make money, or there's tons of intention behind that. So when you think about your work back in 1997 and then compare to today's world, what do you think? How did the internet and also being an artist, questioning and hacking certain ideologies, how did that change and evolve over the last 30 years or 25 years?
Well, the first thought I have is that we were incredibly naive back then. We really thought we can use technology to undermine structures that we are critical of, like the art world, So it was a bit an innocent take on technology. And of course, it took a while. There was a lot of things going on, like Netzkritik and, mailing lists on critical discourse and technology, all of that. And then all of a sudden, social media appeared, and it was obvious social media is bad. We don't engage, it's corporate. Someone privately owns what we are doing there, and they are harvesting our data, and we don't want to be part of this exploitation system. People started to develop alternatives which did not really take off for certain reasons. And social media proliferated, became bigger. And I think recently I read that more than half of the world population engages daily with social media. So it's kind of incredibly powerful. And if you imagine that this is all privately owned structures where no one except the owners have control over the terms of use and conditions and how they use data, it's unbelievable. It's like a development which is was totally unexpected. And because we were so busy in our little world trying to create alternatives and to whatever, I think we were a bit ignorant also towards these developments for too long. At least I was. And it took me quite a while actually to understand the power, the real power of social media. And then I also gave up this naive idea. If I don't have a Facebook account, I'm a good person and I'm safe and I don't contribute to it, because it doesn't matter if you have a Facebook account or not. The power, the influence of these platforms to manipulate on large scale people and political processes is there, no matter if I have an account or not. So this was the moment when I started to engage with social media, and also because I got interested really in what attracts people to be there and spend so much time there. And I have to say that I start to understand it from the perspective of a personal user. I think it's the technology behind these platforms is great, and it's interesting what you can do. That I can find people I have not met for a long time. I can keep in touch with people I know, but I'm not close friends. I can still follow what they're doing. I can announce my own work. The only strict rule that I have is that I don't publish any private stuff, neither my food nor pictures of my family or whatever. It's a very useful information infrastructure, which I also use and also criticize at the same time. But it's not easy to find a good, like an entry point for a reasonable criticism, I think. Because you can say we should expropriate Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, but if we expropriate him, to whom should it be given, this global infrastructure? I don't know. Big question.
So is your relationship to social media maybe a little bit like a relationship to capitalism? Like you might not like it or criticize it, but you can't really not live in a capitalist society, at least where we live.
It's more specific, I think, because you have different social media platforms who function differently, do different things. The criticism on social media is based on an anti-capitalist criticism, which means, it's based on exploiting not just people and their work, but also the world, the earth, the environment. So at the moment, I'm still I have the feeling I'm still researching, I'm trying out things, I'm exploring dynamics, because the dynamics of social media is so complex. Meanwhile, that's the first thing you have to understand. How does these different platforms actually work? What is their power? Where lies their power, in order to get a better understanding of where there might be a point for intervention.
One point of intervention that I think you started in 2019 is Purple Noise, right? Which is a collective that tries to critically work with social media. Can you tell us a little bit about what Purple Noise is and how it came up?
Yeah, Purple Noise is basically was the response to that shock, that I had regarding the power of social media. And it was not only social media, it's also the revelations of Edward Snowden. I think we kind of knew it somehow before, but then it was obvious what was going on, that we are spied on, that our data are being collected without our consent, that governments are completely involved, with secret services, or they are completely helpless in the face of these global corporations who just do whatever they want. They give a shit about national legislation. So this realization was asking to be further explored. And I think that was the moment when we decided we want to work collaboratively. I would not call Purple Noise a collective, because a collective consists of specific people, who kind of agree that they work together. We understand ourselves as an open research group and a network, and we particularly call for participants when we conceive of specific activities and actions. And the idea really is to get a deeper understanding of the dynamics of social media. And so we create interventions, and we try a little bit, as far as possible, to do a sort of reverse engineering and see, when we understand memes are important, or, certain hashtags have a certain power they can unfold. And so we try to work all with these elements, that create, or that are important in the dynamics of social media.
You mentioned this one intervention that you did where I think there was a large scale demonstration and you created posters with certain slogans on it and gave it to random people and took pictures of them and then put it on your Instagram or on Twitter and pretended that these were actually activists of Purple Noise, even though they were random strangers who didn't know what they were protesting for.
Yeah, that was our first research, I would say, was the exploration, or was based on the question how online and offline protests are related. Now everyone posts photos and videos of protests on social media. Other people see it and say, "Oh, there are so many people in the streets in my city. I should also go." So this dynamics also classical media would report differently from what you can get through social media. So this dynamics, how this is connected. And so there was this big demonstration at City of Women's Festival that we basically hijacked by it's not we also didn't give our posters and our banners to everyone, but always to selected group of peoples. But then we had photographers and a filmmaker who took photos, and in the end we could create an online presence that made it look like that this whole demonstration was basically about Purple Noise and our slogans. It was not even slogans. We have very strong visual language, which plays with gender symbols and hashtags.
It reminded me what happened last year, I think in June, when worldwide there were Black Lives Matter demonstrations. There were some of these videos that popped up where you could see models and other influencers basically just appearing for a minute with their own personal photographer holding up the sign Black Lives Matter and then disappearing again, which is a little bit what you've done.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's so incredibly interesting also what influencers do. There's a whole new generation of political activists who are also influencers and have no problem with product placement in their political videos. So we are also looking into this. We have this reputation of being like a political or somehow authentic, research group. We don't do that for money or anything. We have more idealistic goals. If all of a sudden in our next intervention we would all wear, I don't know, Gucci handbags or something, I think it would be quite fun to see what does it to our political goals, or is this a normal thing to happen today? Or I think this is a very interesting thing, that there is a sort of a normalization in the next generation, that they combine also in Black Lives Matter, black activism with commercial advertisements, and think, well, what is going on? I don't get it. It's very confusing, but that's interesting. That is so interesting because it confronts me all the time. It makes me feel so very old, because I think, oh my God, I still had this idealistic ideas what you do and what you don't do. And because they unfold a lot of power with what they do, at the same time, they use their power to do advertisement for the system that they actually criticize. So this is the sort of contradictions that I find very interesting as an artist. And I think it's a good material to work with.
I would like to go back to, the conversation about technology as something that's not neutral, and something when you talked about social media, you were like, it's too easy to say, I'm not just using it because I'm against it, against technology that's privately owned and so on. So you're using social media now in order to understand and to still explore. And at the same time, I feel like we're now getting beyond the stage. I personally perceive that about 4 or 5 years ago, technology criticism really happened on a large scale. You also mentioned it, the revelations by Edward Snowden on government surveillance, or Cambridge Analytica on social media. These were cultural moments where suddenly a very large audience realized that these technologies do things that we are probably not aware of and that we have very little control over. But at the same time, I think it's too easy to really say this and that technology is bad. Like, technology always embeds certain values that we can also decide as individuals, maybe, or as communities, as societies. And I think, in the book that you published in early 2021, Aesthetics of the Commons, there was this one phrase that really stuck with me. That was, you were asking for a call for new social and technological imaginaries, which I interpret as something that if we can start imagining a different future or a different way of using technology, we can actually get there. But maybe what we lack is the imagination, because our imagination is so much defined by what we use nowadays. Can you elaborate a little bit on your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if I talk to people about, everyone is immediately has a lot of criticism about everything. But if you ask people, so what is your wish? If you could make a wish for the future, what would it be? Like, I don't know. So people stopped actually thinking about what they really want, what they desire. And I think it's easy to criticize the system as it's going now. And it's more and more people doing that. A system that is only oriented towards profit. I think that's the problem. It's not the technology itself. I was never against technology. I think technology is still great and we will need it for whatever future. But if the only value that is related to technology is profit making, exploitation of people, their data and their work, and exploiting the earth no matter what it costs and no matter what the consequences are, that is a problem. But the question then that arises also is, who has control over technology? That's an interesting question. How much control do we have? Can we probably get more control, and how would that happen? I mean, so far the system is that you get a lot of things for free, or, allegedly for free. You pay. I mean, you are the product in that case, as we know, if you get anything for free. So you don't need to think about it. You just use it. You give away everything you create and you generate. And that is the system. And I think we need to find ways where we can kind of get into this logic and make people understand that logic. And the control over technology is it's a really big problem because, as I said before, global tech companies are basically out of control. When Trump was banned from Twitter, after the storm on the Capitol, everyone was applauding. But then I thought, this is awful that this corporation can decide who they want to have on their platform and who they don't want to decide. This is impossible. There is no way to regulate this, and it needs regulation. And in all the discussions we had recently, we were kind of coming back to, yes, we need more state control, which doesn't make me very optimistic, because most of politicians have no clue of what's going on. Learning how things work and like making an own server is not, because I absolutely think that is necessary. I mean, you could easily buy server space anywhere and just trust the company that they do it right. Most of them do it right. But it's also to understand what digital infrastructure is. It's not just the software and the hardware. We rely on the connections, on the lines, on the infrastructure, and on the servers. All the cloud services, is nothing but servers that belong to someone else. And the moment if you start to have your own server and understand how complex it is, how difficult it is, how vulnerable it is, you get an understanding of the complexities that are behind. And I think that it's not, that is the idea that we have to do. And it's also, I don't see a revolution that goes like this, expropriation is no problem. So who would be the new owners? But I think it's a very long process of learning. And I think the most important message, even the symbolic disruptions that we are doing as artists are important. But as you said in the beginning, I also understand myself and my work as an educator. And I think it's incredibly important that people come together and that they share their experiences with knowledge, and that they learn things together and they unlearn other things, and they become more emancipated towards technology. I think that's the only thing I can see as a path into the future. And the imaginaries are, of course, that we can still use technologies for a lot of good things, but I think the basic orientation towards exploitation and profit making has to change. This is not sustainable.
Wow, what a great conversation. And I really think Cornelia is right. The same dynamics and power structures that were already in place in technology in the mid-1990s are still there today. They're just much bigger and maybe a little less obvious. But it's still important to question them, challenge them, and eventually hijack the system, just as Cornelia did. If you are curious to dive deeper into techno-feminism, internet art, and further research by Dr. Cornelia Sollfrank, check out the show notes in your podcast app. There's more links for you to check out there. The Culture and Technology podcast is produced by the Vienna Business Agency. The Vienna Business Agency supports businesses, the economy, and the city to develop Vienna's creative industries further. Over and out, until next time.